Hi, Veena ma'am. My name is Jyotsna, media representative of Frontlist Media. So today we have Veena Rao with us for our author's interview. Veena Rao is an author, journalist, and she is a founder of NRI Indian Publishing industry, I guess, a newspaper, sorry. And
Newspaper.
she likes to, devote her time in creative writing. So we would like, congratulations, Veena ma'am. We are
Thank
so
you.
happy to have you on board today. So
Thank you for
our
having me.
audience, our audience would like to know who is Reena Rao? Who is Reena Rao as an author, as a journalist, as a real person? Who you are?
Well, that's $1 million question, right? I guess none of us really know who we are. I guess I'm just a person who is evolving every year. Um, uh, and I think I'm all of those things that you just mentioned. I'm an author, I'm a journalist, I'm an immigrant. I've been living in the US for the past 20 years. I grew up in a small town called Mangalore in Karnataka. It's a coastal town. I'm sure you've heard about it. I've always wanted to become a writer, a world famous writer. When I was 12, I decided that I would be a world famous writer. But then it was my love of creative writing that got me into journalism. So I became a journalist. I worked for the Indian Express for a few years. And then we moved to the US in 2001, and I worked for a couple of publications here. And then I realized that the community needs a newspaper. The community
Okay.
was filled with feature magazines, but there was no hardcore newspaper. And because of my background as a journalist, I decided that I would be the one to start a newspaper.
Okay.
Of course, sitting in my living room, that seemed like a very easy idea, but it wasn't. But uh, it has been one of the most exciting and thrilling journeys of my life, the past 15 years. NRI Pulse, the newspaper that I founded, has been around for 15 years now. We just celebrated our 15th anniversary. And it's a
Wow.
well known, thank you. And it's a well known name here in Atlanta and in the entire region in the Southeast United States and around the United
Okay.
States. So it has been a very thrilling and exciting and challenging journey. Um, and then, of course, my debut book, Purple Lotus, released last fall. And well, that's it, I guess. Um, and I'm also an immigrant, like I said, and I identify as an immigrant writer. And my book is also about an immigrant who moves to the US, the American South. So I guess
Okay.
that's
Okay.
that in a nutshell is my story.
Okay. And so this is your debut novel. So I hope that your book will going to, be a bestseller and, garner the popularity. So all the best for your book.
Thank
So
you.
I would like to start my interview. So my first question to you, Purple Lotus. A book is a story about Tara, right? Who has been fighting for herself. First, she was abandoned by her family. Then she faced domestic violence in a marriage. Still, she is paving a way to acknowledge her self-worth. So, how do you come up with this idea of the story?
Well, I started to write Purple Lotus 12 years ago. Okay. And
Okay.
so I had no story, I had no plot, I had no characters in mind. So I sat in front of a blank page, and the first thing I typed was the title, Purple Lotus. Because I guess, the lotus is such a beautiful symbol of rising above one's circumstances. A lotus grows in muddy waters, but it rises unblemished, tall, beautiful, facing the sun. So I guess I knew what story I wanted to write, what the trajectory of the story would be, but I had no story. But over the years, as the plot progressed, I realized that I wanted to write about a woman who faces a who confronts a patriarchal community. Like
Okay.
my protagonist Tara, I also come from a patriarchal culture, and I have seen firsthand what patriarchy can do, not only to interpersonal relationships, but also just the way you view yourself. Um, and so it was very important for me to write about a woman who feels weak, vulnerable, helpless. She's conditioned to believe she's weak. She feels like she has very little control over her life. And I think most of us who come from patriarchal cultures can identify with this feeling, right? And I also wanted to explore what abuse would do, domestic, because that's one of the principal themes of the book, domestic abuse. I wanted to see what abuse would do to a woman who already has a weak sense of self, who already has pressure from her family to conform, who has deep rooted fears of abandonment. How would she find the courage to break free and gently rebuild her life and learn to honor her own worth?
Okay.
So, yeah.
So this is how you came up with your idea. So
Right. And I'm
basically,
also,
just
yeah,
yeah.
like I said, I'm also a journalist, right? So in my day job, I see incidents of abuse all the time. It happens everywhere in every culture. But there are some cultural aspects that determine how much freedom a woman has to change her circumstances. And
Okay.
for Tara, who comes from a patriarchal community, it's even more hard. It's harder to walk out, simply walk out and start a new life because of the pressure from her community. You know,
Okay.
a victim who manages to leave has to live with labels. She's shunned by her community. She's socially isolated. So I wanted to explore all these elements of a from an immigrant's perspective.
So basically, it's kind of your story, right? It's just
Not no, the
not
story is not mine, but it's the story that it's story that happens so often that we cannot
yeah.
ignore it, right? Yeah. So
Yeah.
it's not an autobiographical story, but it's a lot of it's about every woman who has ever felt weak or vulnerable or like she has no control over her life.
Okay. That's amazing. So my
Thank you.
second question to you. So this is your debut book, novel. So what challenges did you face while writing it as you are a journalist first and then author, right? So whenever you write as an author, it's a different thing. And you are a journalist first, right? And your journalistic style of writing and novel writing is kind of different. So what challenges did you face that time?
Yeah, I'm a self-taught writer. Like you mentioned, I'm a journalist, and like you mentioned, writing as a journalist is very, very different. As a journalist, you write, very concisely. You stick to facts. It's not really writing. You're just reporting. You're just stating facts. But as a creative writer, you know, I had to teach myself to write fiction. So I read. Immigrant authors and all kinds of books and paying attention to style and plot progression and character development until I evolved a style of my own. Yeah, so it took me 10 years to find a publisher for Purple Lotus because in the US, and I'm sure it's that way in India now, you cannot approach a big publisher directly. You have to find a literary agent first. And finding a literary agent is one of the hardest things you will ever do. And it's even harder for an immigrant woman, a brown immigrant woman with no Ivy League degree or a creative arts degree. I'm a self taught writer. I taught myself to write fiction as the book evolved. Um, but I persisted.
Okay.
It took me 10 years to find a publisher for Purple Lotus, but I kept, and so many times I've gone to bed
10
crying.
years. OMG. This is a very struggling story that you took 10 years just to replace the agent
Yes.
from India.
Thank you. Thank you. So, did you get most of my answer? I hope you did. Um,
Yeah,
yeah, let's continue.
your challenge is to just final it. So why didn't you go for the self-publishing industry? If you are
I
not
didn't want to
getting
do that.
any, big publishing industry, you didn't
Yeah,
want to go for self-publishing.
I did not want to get self published because then you're just limited to Amazon or some other website. Now my book released last fall, and it's in every bookstore catalog across the U.S. and Canada. It's in every no, I wouldn't say every, but several libraries across the country. It's in some university libraries. All this would not happen if I were to self-publish the book, right? It would be it would have very limited readership. And so I persisted. I stuck it out for 10 years, kept writing manuscript after manuscript until I found the publisher.
It's kind of inspiring that you took 10 years just to, get published. Every author should learn from you that consistency and hard work. This is the consistency and hard work. I'm
Yeah,
so glad.
persistence pays. There was a little voice at the back of my head that kept telling me, no matter how long it takes, eventually my dream will manifest. Eventually I will find a publisher. And it took me 10 years, but it did happen.
Wow, amazing. So
Thank
when
you.
did you start writing your book, Purple Lotus? In which
I
year?
start, I don't remember the year, but it's 12 years ago. Yeah,
12
12,
years
and
ago.
12 years ago. But 2 years ago, I found my publisher. So,
Okay.
yeah, so it took me all of 12 years.
Wow. So my third question to you. So who is your favorite author and how have they shaped your writing career?
Growing up, like most Indian kids, I, read a lot of detective novels like Hardy Boys and Nancy Drew and thrillers. And later, when I was about 12 or 13, I started devouring Agatha Christie books. I loved Agatha Christie, and I'm very thankful to her for adding so much joy to my growing up years. But as an author, I am very partial to. I read a lot of immigrant fiction authors like Jhumpa Lahiri. I loved Jhumpa Lahiri for her attention to detail. I like Chitra Banerjee Divakaruni for writing very visceral, emotional stories.
Okay.
And of course, my favorite is Khalid Hosseini because he motivated me to,
Oh,
inspired me to write Purple
even I
Lotus.
read his.
12 years ago, somebody gave me a copy of Khalid Hosseini's The Kite Runner. I loved it. And then I read A Thousand Splendid Suns. And I fell in love with the protagonists, Mariam and Laila. And I was inspired to write a story of my own. And so I think I should credit Khalid Hosseini for my writing, for my um,
You read
writing
Jhumpa
career.
Lahiri, Chitra Banner, and a
Yes,
thousand.
I
So how have they shaped your, what was like to read and then write? Basically, it kind of approach author follows schedule or something. So how have they shaped your career, your writing career?
well, they haven't really. Well, I read their books a lot. I paid careful attention to their style, to their plot, to how they, portray emotions and the attention to detail and all of that. But eventually, I had to develop a style of my own, right? That's the only way you will succeed as a writer. You cannot just mimic somebody. But yes, they have inspired me through their books.
Okay, thank you so much. So my fourth question. So as you said that you took like 10 years to find a literacy age and you finally found Mira book, She Writes Press.
Right, express,
So
yes.
why do you choose She Writes Press as your publisher. So what's the standout thing about them?
Well,
She Writes.
I guess we chose each other. In 2019, 2 years ago, I I came across this manuscript contest that they have every year, which is open to women of color. And so I submitted my manuscript, and then I forgot about it because, like I said, I've been dealing with rejections and rejections. So I did not think much about it. I did not hope for a positive outcome. So imagine my joy after a couple of months, I heard from my publisher, Brooke Warner, that I had won the contest and a book deal. Um, so that was a huge life changing moment for me. So I guess we just chose each other. And She Writes Press is wonderful. It's run by a group of women, and it's very, very supportive of its authors. And we have wonderfully supportive authors too. We support each other. I've learned so much about the publishing industry through my fellow authors and through my publishing.
So kind of women empowerment movement with them.
Absolutely, yes.
Okay. So my next question. Through your book, you shed a light on those issues which every woman can feel or resonate in. Okay. So do you really think that your readers will resonate with your story? And what was your writing approach that time when you were writing this book?
Well, like I may have mentioned, my book released last fall, so it's been a few months. And I know for a fact that it has resonated with women from all cultures. I have been engaging with a lot of book clubs across the US, in Canada, and some in India as well. Um, and that's what they tell me. That's what I hear from people, that abuse, which is the principal theme of the book, and also just feeling vulnerable or loneliness. These are all themes that everybody can relate to, right? And Yeah, so I'm sure that has. What was the second part of your question again?
I was asking what was your writing approach while you were writing your book?
Well, there was no approach. I had to teach myself to write fiction, like I said. It was a long 10-year journey where I just taught myself to write fiction. And with each draft, I think my story got better, and my characters got more layered. The story got more layered. And it has been, yeah. So, but maybe for my next book, I'm working on my next book, I'll have a proper approach. I'll have a proper outline. I'll have a story before I start writing.
Okay, okay. So basically, it was your first book, so you just got carried away.
It
Yeah,
was a struggle.
like
It was a struggle. I was just learning along the way,
learning
right? Yeah,
process learning. Okay.
yeah.
So my next question: do you always wanted to be an author? I guess you always want to be, like you said before, or your love for writing aroused because of journalism background. So
Yeah.
basically, everybody has some inspiration in their life to become an author, or what was yours?
Growing up in Mangalore, we had very easy access to some wonderful books growing up. So we always grew up with books. And then when I was 12, I announced to my family that I would grow up to become a famous author. And so I started writing detective novels for my friends to read during lunch hour. For my classmates in school, they used to come and read my books, little novels that were based on Nancy Drew and Hardy Boys, and some other books that I used to read at that time. And this continued. And when I was in college, I used to contribute to some of these women's publications in India, like Femina, Women's Era. I don't know if they're still
Okay.
around. Um, and then, of course, it was my love of writing that got me into journalism, like I mentioned. And then I stopped because life happened. We moved to the US, and I was a journalist. I was consumed with the challenges of running a newspaper. And
Okay.
ultimately, 10 years ago or 12 years ago, I decided that I would have to get back to fiction because that was my main goal in life, right from my, it's been my lifelong dream. And I had
Okay.
to, yeah, I had to wait 10 years to see it through, but it finally happened. My dream finally manifested.
Don't you think it's kind of a bit hard when you're reading for, when you're doing work for journalism and then you are switching to the fiction? Because
It
fiction
is
is
hard.
kind of light read, something, full of emotions. And when
Yes.
we're talking about the journalism, it's kind of, journalistic jargons, which is very, harsh, you can say, matlab, when you compare with the
It's
fiction.
direct. Yeah, it's direct. You're just stating facts. You're not making things up. You're not creating a whole world inside your head. Yeah, but I've enjoyed this. This little. I usually create my scenes during long walks or long showers or when I'm meditating. I sit
Okay.
cross-legged. I can sit on the floor cross-legged for hours, just imagining all my scenes. But and I've enjoyed doing that. It's so different from my day job, where you're just sticking to facts. You're talking to people, getting the information, and putting it in a report, right? So
Okay.
this has been yeah, and it is also a stress buster because journalism and running a newspaper, it's a small business. Running a business can be stressful, and then to just unwind, create a whole world, and yeah, it's been it's an enjoyable journey, I would say.
So would you like to share some about your next book?
Yes, it's a work in
Right.
progress. Yeah, well, I don't have the title yet, but it is set in small town, rural, southern United States, in Georgia. That's where I live in Atlanta, which is in the state of Georgia. So it's set in small town Georgia, and it is about an immigrant woman once again. And
Okay.
it's yeah, I'm an immigrant woman, but there's also another protagonist who is a Southern American woman who's in her
That's nice.
70s.
Okay.
Yes, so it's going to be a bit different from Purple Lotus. Purple Lotus had a more personal. It dealt with social issues like domestic violence and patriarchy and mental health. But this book, my next book, will be more about casual racism and the rise of nationalism, both here as well as in India. And it'll be entirely different.
Okay. Okay. So my last question to you. So as you said that you are an immigrant author, right? So I would like to, know your some experience as an immigrant person over there in Georgia. So how was it throughout these
Um,
years?
well, I was very fortunate. Very early on in my life here, I came across some wonderful women, wonderful men too, but mostly women, who were very, very supportive of me, who welcomed me with open arms, and they've been part of my journey. And a couple of them I mention in my book. My friends, Frances West and Nancy Hayden. Nancy passed away 3 days ago, but Frances
Okay.
is still full of life. She's 99 years old.
Okay.
We've had some wonderful adventures, and they've taught me so much about life, about living a full life, living a life of positivity and service, giving back to the community. And Yes, and a lot of other immigrants. I mean, a lot of other women, international women, who call Atlanta home now. I've made some wonderful
Okay.
friendships that have lasted me a lifetime and has helped me grow as a person.
Okay, wow, it's a good experience you have right now. So
Yes,
I hope that everyone gets this kind of experience who is immigrant. So, Veena ma'am, thank you so much. We had a great interview session with you, and I really like talking to you, your experience, your life. It was amazing.